Games Workshop low-key revealed that there are more than 4 Chaos Gods in the Burning of Mot PDF. The information flew under the radar for years, until I released a video on the 8 Chaos Gods and their Aetheric dominions, which blew up huge for a tiny channel. But I made a mistake, because in fact, there are 9, and one of them is none other than the God Emperor of mankind. And we need to talk about this again in light of some new lore, especially what we learn about the nature of godhood in the Dawn of Fire novel, The Silent King. Because I started this mess, I think it's time we dive in deeper and clear it up. Also, I was really new to YouTube when I released the original exploration of this topic, and the background music was way too loud. So not only will I be bringing new thoughts to this insane lore, but making amends for past sins as well. Okay, so the Burning of Mot might be a supplement for the Horus Heresy that was only released as a PDF on the Warhammer community site, but the lore revelations in it are immeasurable. There, it gives the rules for fielding demon armies in the 2nd edition of Horus Heresy, Age of Darkness, and it explains how there are 8 distinct Aetheric dominions that the major powers of chaos hold sway over. Each god is a king of a realm of chaos, essentially, and even the ones who are not yet birthed into our physical universe in any way are represented, because it turns out the rules for gods existing, not existing, living, dying, being born, etc. are all different in the warp, which is a place of infinity. It exists outside of space and time completely. Now we know that there are 4 dominions that are ruled by the big 4 chaos powers: Tzeentch, Khorne, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. But there are 4 others, and while 2 of them are super obvious, 2 are not. In fact, there's a little bit of room for interpretation, and there has been a lot of debate over who the entities that rule over these Aetheric dominions actually are. And I will say, the comments on my last video about this show a very wide range of beliefs on who those 2 are. Though everyone was pretty much universally agreed that the gods Malice and Vashtor were represented, myself included. So before we look at the 9th god, let's discuss the 8 Aetheric dominions and which gods rule them. And when we read about the big 4, they're represented in a way that is obvious which dominion is which. But first, let's look at the PDF and how it describes the Aetheric dominions. An Aetheric dominion represents one of the innumerable hosts of demon kind, each of which is sworn to a greater entity that resides within the warp. Those encompassed by the same dominion share similar features and behaviors, embodying a primordial force or idea given physical form. Most will share identifying features that link them with the inscrutable patron they serve, providing the smallest sense of unity across the demonic host. Okay, so we see that there are 8 dominions indeed, and each one is ruled by a chaos power. First we come to Heedless Slaughter, the dark fury of battle and the red joy of life's final end. For some among the hordes of the warp, the only goal was to fight and to die. It mattered not where or why, as long as blood flowed. Such vile entities would appear garbed in the trappings of conquerors and executioners, caring only for the tally of skulls and death they might reap from the mortal world, irrespective of such concerns as friend or foe. We can safely say that this dominion belongs to the blood god Khorne. Next up, we come to Putrid Corruption. A slow corruption, rotting away body and soul, with no final release in death. Among the hosts of chaos, there were those who cared nothing for victory or defeat, only that suffering was spread to as many as possible. Such creatures were ushered forth into the material world in a miasma of disease and filth, content to spread their vile gifts to the world of mortals. That's obviously Nurgle. Next we come to Rapturous Sensation, a maddening screech of sensation and wild impulses. For some among the numberless tide of chaos, the ends of violence truly mattered not. Merely that they were there to take part and to experience its vicissitudes, inflicting overwhelming pain and gorging on mortals' fear. These demon kind reveled in the sensory overload of war, bounding over shell-sundered battlefields to deliver blissful death as they exulted in each blinding flash and deafening blast. Nothing says Slaanesh like this does, pretty obvious as well. Next we come to Infernal Tempest, Some hosts of demonkind brought forth a maelstrom of raw warp stuff with them, manifesting the energy of the immaterium as sheer elemental power. Around these entities roiled tempests of prismatic balefire, the air riven with crackling arcs of unreal lightning as the earth twisted into fragments of shimmering crystal. To these demons there was no higher purpose than the promulgation of that power and of its profligate use on the battlefields of the mortal realm. Quite a tongue twister there. So that to me says Tzeentch. Some of the other ones are kind of Tzeentchy too, I suppose, but this one is aligned exactly opposite of putrid corruption. Now we come to the fun part, or the first fun part actually, because there's more. Malevolent Artifice. Just as chaos reflects back a twisted mockery of humanity's every facet, so too is the very drive to create perverted into a malevolent and destructive force within the immaterium. Conjured forth into real space, such demonkind harness the works of mortals as a vector for their own annihilation. These monstrous machine entity forms, at once a mimicry of flesh and artifice, every action made to demonstrate their supremacy over both mortal beings and everything they deigned to create. Okay, this is Vashtor, and that tells me one thing. Since he's on this list, and very obviously that means one of two things. Vashtor makes it to godhood, as he's trying to do in the current 40k timeline, through the Arcs of Omen arc. But if he didn't make it, that means someone else did, because this is definitely the etheric dominion that he belongs to. Whether or not he ends up ruling it or not, I guess, is up for debate. But if it were uncontested, well, we can now assume that Vashtor is indeed a full-on chaos god, instead of a powerful demon with aspirations of godhood. Next, we come to Ravenous Dissolution. Such is the hatred that swirls within the warp that it encompasses all things, and like the dragon of eternity that feasts upon its own tail, this hatred extends even to itself. To expect rational and sane logic from creatures such as these would be foolish, for chaos was both its name and nature. Yet in its self-destructive hatred there was no ally to be found, only a new and more unpredictable foe. Malice. If you know anything about Malice, which is not Malal, I don't even want to hear about it, then you know this is Malice, god of anarchy and hatred. And we've known he's a god of chaos in 40k, confirmed since 3rd edition's Codex and the original Eye of Terror campaign. I miss that old lore. To me, Eldred Ulthrin was better off dead, but the retcons are otherwise not that bad. Now we have two more etheric dominions, but the gods who rule them, I do not myself pretend to know who they are. First, we have the etheric dominion of Formless Distortion. Even as demons manifest as obscene parodies of mortal forms, the true essence of chaos is endlessly shifting and unknowable, twisting, changing, and perverting everything it touches. Some demons who crossed the veil into real space embodied this ceaseless distortion to its fullest extent, shaping themselves into roiling agglomerations of immaterial flesh and bone, for whom death was simply one component of the eternal metamorphosis they would inflict upon the material world. I have seen a lot of people claim this one is actually Tzeentch or some other god. People were claiming Great Horned Rat, Hashut, all sorts of other gods, but I honestly don't know. But next we come to the etheric dominion that many people are getting confused about, and that's the dominion of Encroaching Ruin. Chaos in its purest form is a terror that few can stand before and remain sane. It hungers only for destruction, that all things mortal meet their predestined end and crumble into dust to be forgotten. To this singular end it moves inexorably, driven by a nightmarish purpose which subsumes the petty divisions of demonkind. Now, many of my viewers, and other YouTubers, have suggested that this is in fact the dominion of the Dark King. But my friends, there is more to the Burning of Ohm-Mot PDF than that. Notice that the gods we refer to as the Big Four are not depicted along the primary points, but are on the secondary arms of the star. Does this mean that the four unnamed gods are the stronger, more important figures? Just something to consider based on the depiction. But we need to take an even closer look at the Octaris itself, the Star of Chaos. And we see that it obviously has 8 points, so of course there should be 8 distinct powers at least. But in the image we see that in the center of the cyclone, the wellspring from which all chaos flows is depicted as the empty ring. the circle inside the Octaris, and it is named the Primordial Annihilator. Each of the dominions seems to be emanating from it, and I'm here to tell you folks that this is the darkest thing that ever existed, a being of immeasurable power, the representation of pure chaos itself, not just a foulness clawing its way up from the deepest depths of the deep warp. It is the deep warp, the source of all chaos, of which the etheric dominions are but a piece, each a singular aspect of its infinite awesomeness and chaos. And with the clues laid out in the Silent King, in the way the Cabal speak of the Primordial Annihilator, as well as the lore behind the demon Samus right out of the burning of Mot, we see that the Primordial Annihilator is just another name for the Dark King. The very god of chaos undivided itself is the horror that the Emperor of Mankind nearly became, and according to Malkador, will become inevitably. Gods aren't born in a linear way, remember, and the Dark King already exists in the warp. From the Dawn of Fire novel, The Silent King, we get a passage that reveals what the Eldar Farseers know about gods and the nature of such things, when Ilyana Natase was talking with Rabute Gilliman. "Not all gods are evil," said Natase. "You are wrong, Donis Maxim, and you speak only of the gods born out of the Immaterium. You neglect the Catan, the Ingir we called them. They too were gods." He sighed, collected himself, as if he were a schoolmaster about to deliver a much simplified lesson to children that would still not understand. "You are right when you say that power defines a god," he said. "Temporal, spiritual, physical, it matters not." He fell silent a moment. "My people define godhood in several ways, but there are two broad categories. The gods of the other sea, who are reflections of what you call the Materium, and the gods of the Materium itself, who you know as the Catan. Though there are other, more ancient and even more terrible things than they. The gods of the Materium are an essential part of its fabric. They're able to influence its structure, such is their intimate connection to it, but they are bound nevertheless by the laws of this reality. The gods of the warp are more ephemeral, and more diverse in type. Many are mere concentrations of feeling. Some were once mortals themselves, before the belief of others changed them. The gods of my ancestors were of both sorts, I believe, though this is not the only philosophy propounded by my people. And I have heard many heated debates on the subject. It's impossible to say now, for our gods were slain when we fell, and even if they could be asked, they would not know the truth of it, for the truth would change anyway, as it must, according to the beliefs of those who had faith in them. Yet another kind are agglomerations of souls of those who were once living, or so say the Inari, whose supposed deity, Ennead, was unleashed by the breaking of Biel-Tan, but who, in truth, can say? One, two, all, or more of these things can be true at one moment, and may change at another. There are gods that eat gods, gods that are eternal, gods that were, but now never were, and gods that come into being only to have existed for all time. The origins of gods are therefore impossible to catalog. They have no histories but the histories people impose upon them. I would agree with your sorcerer here, to an extent. Puissance is the defining aspect of them. A grave expression crossed his face. Faith is another, though this does not apply to all. Some beings do not require faith, but falsehood is not intrinsic to them all. "Explain," said Gilliman. "The Catan, as far as our legends test, were essential components of creation, hungry, evil to mortal eyes, but part of it. They require no belief to live, in the same way the suns they devoured require no observer to be, nor do the great four gods of chaos, who have become so all-powerful they are in essence self-sustaining, though the faith of their followers makes them stronger. Nor does the great devourer, the mind of the Tyranids, a being that is generated by the unthinking actions of its physical component parts, and that is perhaps greater than all the rest. Is that a god? Some of our philosophers agree so. Others vehemently disagree. But for other gods, lesser gods, faith is vital. Without faith, they collapse into formlessness, becoming non-sentient vortices of emotion. Unstable, they die. But if the people of the Imperium cease to believe in the Emperor, he would not vanish, said Gilliman. He has a physical presence, even now. He sits upon the throne. By that measure, he is not a god. How can you be so sure? Simply because he existed before he took to his throne? You base your supposition on the idea that he was actually a man to begin with, and that he did not lie. You also suppose that what sits upon the golden throne still has a mortal life, and would persist should his worship cease, said Natase. Did I not say there are gods who were once mortals? These beings become focal points for belief, and belief begets faith. As the pure gods of the warp do, those that are consciousness which emerge from the other sea. The difference is, for gods who were something before they were gods. So the fact that Big E didn't become the Dark King, and instead was interred on the Golden Throne, doesn't really mean anything, as in the warp he's already born. He's already the king of the gods. The Chaos Gods fear him, as they are essentially just huge, dominion-encompassing demons, each one a different aspect of the source, of the Primordial Annihilator, of the Dark King. So it is no wonder why the Terminus Decree is so extreme. If the Emperor ever gets up off that throne, he must be put back on it no matter what. And if you've seen my video on the throne actually keeping the Emperor dead rather than keeping him alive, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Malcador knew the Emperor would inevitably become the Dark King, that it was unavoidable. And he knew the truth was too extreme, so terrible, that it would shatter the Imperium. Valdor is ostensibly off being the King in Yellow, trying to find the Emperor's true name. The throne is failing. The inevitable doom of humanity will be birthed like Slaanesh, but the Eldar seem to think that unlike the god their civilization birthed, the Dark King, which they pretty much only call Primordial Annihilator, will destroy not just humanity and the Imperium, but the galaxy, possibly the universe itself. The irony is that the Emperor did not want to become a god, but as Natase says, he may not have had a choice. People took it upon themselves to worship him, and thus a god is created in the warp. The same fate can befall Gilliman, or any of the Primarchs if they aren't careful. It is a truly sharp blade whose edge the fate of humanity rests upon. Keeping the Emperor in a state of death and unable to heal is one way to hold the darkest being in existence at bay for the time being. The Starchild has a lot of work ahead of it if it is going to save humanity from the Dark King. I for one am glad this lore was added. It makes a lot of things a lot clearer, and I love how grimdark the Warhammer 40k lore has become. Still, 10,000 years after the Horus Heresy, humanity is still dealing with the fallout of that great conflict. For many years I assumed the Primordial Annihilator was a term that the Eldar just used as a blanket term for all chaos. But the more I looked at this PDF, the more I read and came across Eldari perspectives and Cabal members' perspectives, I realized they were talking about a being, a super god essentially, a dark source from which all chaos originated. Malcador sees this hideous future clearly. He saw what will become and knows that our best bet is to simply prolong the inevitable as long as possible. For who knows what any of us would become, truly, if we ascended to godhood on the back of quintillions of believers' faith. Even the lowliest person in existence would be a force of immeasurable power. But then scale that up to Big E and we've got galactic scale problems. It's like I always tell people who are new to 40k, which is what they never want to hear or believe, but the Emperor of Mankind has been the main antagonist of this setting for the past 38 years. Games Workshop has always hinted at it and beat around the bush, but now they've full on just jumped in the deep end and it's awesome. Chaos and the Imperium are much more intertwined than most people realize. Just look Abaddon in the eyes. You'll literally see the light of the Astronomicon.